everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I've read so far in January. It is mid-January and right now I have 7 books to update you on. The first book I read, or the first 3 books I've read, are in a series, and it's the Mark of the Lion series by Francine and the first book is A Voice in the Wind. And so we start off this book with following this Jewish girl living in Jerusalem, and her name is Hadassah. And Jerusalem is at war with Rome, and so Hadassah ends up being taken away from her family and captured, and then the Romans bring her to Rome, and she is sold to a wealthy family as a slave girl, and she becomes Julia. So Julia, I don't know, she's about like 15, 16, I would say. She becomes Julia's slave girl. And so she basically does whatever Julia asks, and she has very little experience. And so Julia also has a brother named Marcus, and Julia has been asking Marcus if he will take her to the gladiator games, and she's been asking this for 2 years, and Marcus finally says yes. And so what the gladiator games are they're basically, back in that time, 2 people would fight until the death, and then that person would be the winner. And so Julia goes to these games, and she sees a gladiator that she really likes, and his name is Aertres. And Aertres is from Germany. He was also captured by Rome, and they made him into a gladiator. And Julia's dad also thinks it's time for her to get married. So she gets married to this older guy, probably 30 or 20 or 30 years older than her. His first wife has passed away, and so he is looking for a male heir. And Julia does not want to marry this man, but her father says she has no choice in the matter. And so we follow Julia and Hadassah as Hadassah tries to show the love of Jesus to Julia. And she also has to be careful about how much she talks about God and religion and Jesus with Julia, because especially in Rome, talking about Jesus and his death and resurrection and your faith can get yourself killed. And I really enjoyed that book. And the second book is An Echo in the Darkness, and this book follows Marcus, so that's Julia's brother. Marcus is very upset with Julia because of what happened in the first book, and Marcus wants to learn more about Jesus and who he was and who he is, so he goes on a trip back to Hadassah's homeland in Jerusalem to learn about Jesus. Marcus eventually comes home, and he finds that his mother and his sister are both very sick, and so that is also an important part of the story as well. Those 2 books went together really well in a series, and this next one does as well. I just like to think of it as more of a standalone book. In this one, we specifically follow Aertres, so the gladiator that was fighting in book 1. He has to fight in this competition, and then if he wins this competition out of every single person who fights, he'll earn his freedom. And if he gets his freedom, Aertres wants to go back home and find his family. Aertres also has a secret, and he wants to take steps to figure out that as well if he was to gain his freedom. This was my favorite book in the entire series, and I just loved it so much. It just had so many themes of redemption and forgiveness and just understanding, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was such a great book. Next book I read was I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay, and this book is about a successful film producer and podcaster, Bodhi. And when she was in high school, she went to this boarding school, and at this boarding school there was a murder of this girl who was murdered in the swimming pool, and they found the murder culprit, and his name is Omar, and they put him in jail, and that's kind of been the end of it. So Bodhi gets invited back, I think 20 years later, to teach at this school as a film producer as like someone who produces podcasts, that kind of stuff. And so one of the assignments for her students is she has this list of people they can pick from, and then they have to make 3 podcasts about the situation. And she has this her friend's name. Her friend's name is Talia, and Talia was also her former roommate. So she has her friend's name Talia on the list, and someone from the class picks Talia's name to look up more into her murder and see if there was like anything that got missed or anything that the police didn't look at, to see if there are any other suspects other than Omar. And Bodhi student starts this case and they get really involved, and they kind of go deeper than Bodhi ever expected them to. So it was a really interesting read. The next book I read was Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate, and this book is a fictional story about, in 1939, about the Tennessee Children's Home Society orphanage. So we follow this fictional family. We follow a girl named Rill, and her mom is about to have a baby. And so what ends up happening is they kind of live on a boat in like a river or something, and it's not, the pregnancy or the birthing process isn't going well for her mom. And I think there's 5 siblings total right now, and Rill is the oldest and she's 12. So the mom and the dad, they go to the hospital so that they can have this baby. And while they're at the hospital, these government official people come pick up these kids, and then they take them to the Tennessee Children's Home for Orphans, or Tennessee Children's Home Society orphanage. And these kids are like thinking they're just going to spend a couple nights here, and that they're going to go back home eventually, but soon they realize that like they aren't ever going to get to go home, and that there's just going to be people who will adopt them, and then they also have to stay in the orphanage for a while, and the orphanage is very abusive to them. So we follow that. We also follow Avery in present day, and she was born into a wealthy family. Her dad is a politician, and she is kind of trying to join him and become a politician. And so she goes to a politician event, and there's this old lady there, and this lady takes her bracelet, and she eventually goes back to get this bracelet, but what she learns there changes the course of events for her life and even her parents' life. And she also has to decide what she wants to do now, knowing this truth, because in knowing the truth, it could be very damaging. I just really love this book. It was such a fascinating book, and it really opened my eyes into what people went through back in the late 1930s, because that book was based on a true story. And then I read Before and After by Judy Christie and Lisa Wingate. And like I said, that book was based on a true story. So now the Before and After book is hearing the people's true stories from actual survivors of the Tennessee Children's Home Society orphanage. So from the 1920s to the 1950s, Georgia Tann ran kind of like a black market baby market, and so she would literally kidnap babies or children from their families, or like unknowingly, like manipulatively make them sign over their rights as parents without them realizing it. And so they would surrender their kids, and then they wouldn't realize it until they went to pick their kids up, and they would be like, well, your kid's adopted somewhere else. When Lisa Wingate wrote Before We Were Yours, there were people that wrote back to her and was like, this is what I've experienced, or this is what like my parents have experienced. Like, would you be interested in hearing my story? Would you be interested in having a reunion? So this book is literally just filled with people's stories of the true events that had happened. And then they did have a reunion, and people who have been connected to it got together with the hopes of like helping themselves or helping other people find their family members, because it's taken such a long time. And it was just, like I said, a super interesting book, and I was so grateful that I read Before We Were Yours first and then Before and After, because I was originally just going to read Before and After, but if this is based on the true story from this book, then I should read this book first and then go and read this book. And I'm so glad I did. And were both so informative and so interesting. The last book so far that I have to update you on is Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown, and this takes us on a journey through 87 of the emotions that our heart can feel and experiences that defines what it means to be human. She breaks it into 13 sections, and so for number 2, places we go when we compare, and then she has emotions that she talks about. And then places we go when it's beyond us, so awe, wonder, confusion, curiosity, interest, surprise. And places we go when we're hurting, when life is good, places we go with others. And so that was just really interesting that she had broken it down into 3 sections. And so this is from the section of places we go when we compare. So I'm just going to read this section. Schadenfreude is a compound of the German word Schaden, meaning harm, and Freude, meaning joy. It is pronounced Schadenfreude, and the world is full of it these days. It simply means pleasure or joy derived from someone else's suffering or misfortune. It means rejoicing at, taking fun in, or getting pleasure from the misfortune of others. There's a cruelty and insecurity about it. Taking pleasure in someone else's failings, even if that is a person we really dislike, can violate our values and lead to feelings of guilt and shame. It's easy to build counterfeit connections with collective Schadenfreude. I say counterfeit because when we see someone who we don't like, we disagree with, or is outside of our group stumble, fall, or fail, it's tempting to celebrate that suffering together and to stir up collective emotion. That kind of bonding might feel good for a moment, but nothing that celebrates the humiliation or pain of another person builds lasting commitment. Schadenfreude involves counter-empathy. Our emotional reaction is incongruent with another person's emotional experience. When someone else is suffering and we feel joy, there's decreased activity in the area of the brain that produces empathy and increased activity in the reward centers. In other words, when we feel Schadenfreude, it shuts down the area of our brain that we use when feeling empathy and lights up the areas of the brain that makes us feel good and that entice us to engage in similar behaviors in the future. The next one I want to talk about is a paradox. A paradox is the appearance of a contradiction between 2 related components. Although light and darkness seem to be opposites, you can't have one without the other. The opposing elements are a paradox of inextricably linked. Even though these elements seem contradictory, they actually complement and inform each other in ways that allows us to discover underlying truths about ourselves and the world. Here's an example of a paradox. Vulnerability is the first thing we look for in other people, and the last thing we want to show them about ourselves. How can both of those statements be true? If we dig into the tension of that statement, it reveals truths about us. We're drawn to authentic, imperfect people, but we're scared to let people see who we really are. I want to experience your vulnerability, but I don't want to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is the courage in you and inadequacy in me. I'm drawn to your vulnerability, but I'm repelled by mine. Embracing the paradox teaches us how to think deeper and with more complexity. It invites us to reality check the validity of the statements above. It moves us away from oversimplifying how systems, organizations, and humans work. And so that was just really eye-opening to me. Like, I'm someone who really loves having meaningful connections with people, and if I want to have someone like share something with me, I should be willing to share my stuff with others too. So that was something that really spoke to me. And she talks about places you go when you have wronged people, and she has this really great diagram in here, and it's called the 4 Horsemen and how to stop them with their antidotes. I don't know how well you can see that, but the first one is criticism. So verbally attacking or blaming your partner's character. Why do you always make us late? So you could do a gentle startup. State how you feel about the situation and what you need. I feel frustrated about being late. I need to be on time. Then there's defensiveness. Victimizing yourself to ward off a perceived attack to reverse the blame. Come on, you know I have a hard time getting up in the morning. Instead, you could take responsibility, so accept your partner's perspective and offer an apology for any wrongdoing. I'm sorry for running late. I know how important it is for you to be on time. And then there's contempt, attacking your partner's sense of self with insulting or abusive language that communicates superiority. I've learned how to tell time when I was 5. When are you going to ever learn? Instead, you could describe your own feeling and needs. So express your positive needs instead of your partner's flaws. It's important to me to be punctual. Please help me with that. And then stonewalling, withdrawing from interaction to avoid conflict and convey disapproval, distance, and separation. Thinking, I can't take this anymore. I gotta get out of here. To self-soothing, asking for a break or ask for a break using a signal or word that you both agree on. Spend the break doing a calming activity on your own. Timeout. I need a break. I'm going to go for a walk and we can talk again in 30 minutes. So that was just some good ideas for me of like how to address things in a nice way, because I have a tendency to be harsh sometimes. And then the last thing I want to talk about in this book is practicing story stewardship. So the author starts this section by acknowledging that I've been wrong about something for years. For 2 decades, I've said we need to understand emotion so we can recognize it in ourselves and others. Without exaggeration, I've said this thousands of times, and I've heard it from other researchers at least that much. Well, let me go on the record right now. I no longer believe that we can recognize emotion in other people, regardless of how well we understand human emotion and experience, or how much language we have. Why have I stopped believing that we can recognize emotion in other people? 2 reasons. 1, too many emotions and experiences present the exact same way. There's no way to know through observation if your tears come from grief, despair, hopelessness, or resentment, just to name a few. Absolutely no way. 2, while research shows that there are some universal facial expressions for a small number of emotions, how we express what we're feeling and experiencing can be seen as unique as we are. How do we know what other people are feeling? We ask them. It's only then that we are able to connect with the grounded confidence to engage and then the courage to walk alongside. When they tell us what they're feeling, what happened, and the fear or desire, we listen and we become a trusted steward of their stories. And I just thought that was one of the good ending points of this book, is just if we don't know how someone is feeling, we can just ask them and then we can move forward with that instead of just assuming that we know how they're feeling. The next book I read was Beyond Ivy Walls by Rachel Fordham, and this is set in Iowa in 1903, and we follow a man named Otis Taylor, and he hasn't been home for years. When he was very young, his father sent him away, and we are told that the reason his father told everybody for sending him away is because he is becoming a musical prodigy and he's going to study and become a famous performer. That's not the reason, but the reason he's coming home is because his parents have passed away and his brother has also passed away, and so it's just him left in the family, and he wants to sell the mansion. And we also follow a 23-year-old named Sadie, and she is from a farm, and she has come to the city to work because her father is sick. And she's always trying to send money home, trying to help out. So because she's always trying to help out, she's really desperate. And so she gets kicked out of the apartment she's living in. So she trespasses onto this property and finds herself living in an abandoned building. And little does she know that this building belongs to Otis Taylor. And this is the start of a friendship between Otis and Sadie, and it was just a really beautiful book to read, a beautiful story to watch, and then I just really loved watching their friendship bloom into what it became. The next book I read was Another Time by Jim and Sue Keaton with Becky Heap, and Becky Heap is their daughter who wrote the book, and this is a memoir of Jim and Sue Keaton, and Becky is in a family of 9 kids, and these are all 9 kids, and this is Becky right here, and she helped her parents write the book, and this was just a story about her parents, and from when they were growing up to when they got married to them then being in ministry together, and her dad was a pastor, and her mom was a pastor's wife with 9 kids, and it was just following their story. And I really enjoyed this book, and I just want to share some quotes from this book. One of the quotes that Mr. Keaton said in this book is under the section of, as Christian workers, we must always be true to our calling. And then he says, if you are called to Christian ministry, embrace your calling with your whole being. Do not allow the difficulties that will surely come to pull you away to do an easier work. Do not turn aside from your sacred duty to share God's word with the world. And so that quote just stuck out to me. I have a little side business that's like a Christian ministry, and so it doesn't always go that great. Sometimes it goes really well, sometimes it doesn't, and it just was a good reminder for me. And then like also for like if other people are like, oh, maybe it's time that you give that up, like, no, this is like the ministry that God has called me to. And even if I didn't do well at like a specific event, there are still like seeds I planted, I interacted with people, and you don't know what those seeds or those interactions mean to people. You have to trust that God is going to use that moment with that person as something they can point back to later in life. And then there's also this quote, not only did we teach our children honesty, but we considered it vital to practice as well. We believed and still do that it is useless to punish a child for lying and then to turn around and shoot a deer without a license or cheat on your taxes. These type of inconsistencies are not lost on young people. While salvation alone can purify the heart and enable a child to overcome a spirit of deception, a family code of honesty will cultivate a healthy conscience and make following Christ and doing the right thing easier. Now, I don't have kids, but that was just a really good reminder. Like, we, like, as Christians are being a witness to people, and if we're gonna, like, say that we're Christians and then turn around and do something that's un-Christ-like, we're not giving a very good testimony to those people. So that was just another really good reminder. I also really love what he says about this. I'm not married, but this is just a really great quote. Sue and I loved one another deeply, but we realized early on in our marriage that this was not enough. It is important that married couples understand that although we are one, we will each stand before God not as a married couple but as individuals. Our relationship with God is personal. So Sue and I encouraged one another to seek the Lord, to nurture that relationship first. Somehow when we do this, our coming together is that much sweeter. We had grace and wisdom and divine love to face the marital challenge that came to us. I needed time with the Lord alone. Sue needed time with the Lord alone. I was never intended to be God in her life, nor she in mine. There were so many other quotes in this book that I really loved, but I just want to end with this quote. Receiving God's vision for our lives is vital, not only for ministers of the gospel, but for every man or woman who wants to make an eternal impact. There are many things to say about vision, but I, Jim, am concerned particularly about the impact that our vision for God's kingdom will have on the generations that follow in our footsteps. What we do in life doesn't end with us. Our son Troy preached a powerful message recently from the book of Genesis, where he led us through some unlikely passages, those often uninspiring genealogies. His point was to emphasize the contrast between the long-term generational impact of both the godly and the ungodly. From Genesis 4, verses 17 to 24, we see the offspring of Cain, the first murderer. It is sobering to read of a man named Lamech, who is 5 generations after his ancestor, killed a man and said, if Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 70-fold. Cain's murderous heart ripped down through the generations. In striking contrast, if we trace the descendants of Seth for 5 generations, we discover Enoch, a man who walked with God. And just 3 generations later, Noah comes on the scene, a man who found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Seth's righteousness rippled down through the generations. Our son so faithfully admonished us that we should never believe the lie that we raise our kids, get them out of the house, have an amazing life until we die, and our kids can do and live in whatever way they please. Powerful, challenging truth. But in the same way, Troy reminded us that both righteousness and evil have rippling effects long after we're gone. So I believe that a life of vision or a life of carelessness and short-sightedness will affect the generations that follow us. in life and ministry, but you should do nothing with only the short-term goal in mind. The next book I read was Nightbird Calling by Kathy Golke, and this is about a woman named Liliana, and her mother just recently passed away, and Liliana decides to run away because she is in an abusive marriage, and she runs away to the foothills of No Creek, North Carolina, and she goes to her Aunt Hyacinth's place. And Aunt Hyacinth is this very welcoming lady, and everyone is welcome in her house, even regardless of the color of their skin, and that is something that is a very hot topic in No Creek. Liliana is safe in this town, and she makes some friends. She even wants to start like a lending library from Aunt Hyacinth's house, but there are people who are against that because they want to make it available to everyone, not just white people, and so there can be lots of fighting from that, and there's also some secrets that can be revealed about Liliana, and so this was just a really great story to follow, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read was The Library of Lost and Found by Phaedra Patrick, and we follow this girl named Martha Storm, and she really loves books. One day there's this book that's left on her doorstep, and it's just a book about fairy tales, but she opens the book and finds this dedication in there, and this dedication was written to her by her grandmother who died years earlier. But the thing is, this dedication that was written 3 years after her grandmother died. And so now Martha is really confused, and she thinks that her grandmother may be alive. So she goes on this search to find her grandmother and the secrets that her grandmother may have kept from her or her family. And I just found it a really enjoyable, nice read. The next book I read was The Choices She Made by Felicia Ferguson. In this book, it's 1997, and we are following a girl named Madeline. She's 17 years old, and she's kind of torn between two choices in her life. She either continuing her family ranching legacy or accepting a proposal from her boyfriend, but after high school is finished, she's going to go join the army. And one day, Madeline is at like an auction where they're selling animals, and she is assaulted by this guy named John David Billings, and she ends up pregnant, and so she ends up deciding to leave town and raise the child alone. And then we're several years in the future, I think 13 years later, she returned to her hometown. There are lots of rumors about John David's trial for assaulting other women, and Madeline has never told anybody about what has happened. If she testifies, she could help put John David in jail, but also if she testifies, then she'll be revealing secrets about her past that she's never told anyone except her father. Felicia Ferguson did a really great job of just bringing all the elements of the story together and making it into a very redemptive, sweet story, and so I really enjoyed it. The next book I read is Through the Gates of Splendor by Elizabeth Elliot, and this is a true story of 5 young missionaries who were killed while trying to share the gospel with the Auca tribe in Ecuador. And Jim Elliot is one of the most famous men who died in this story, and his wife Elizabeth Elliot wrote the book. I feel like I've known this story my whole life, but I feel like I can't believe that I've never read the book. Like, I've known this story, but it's just, I don't know, I feel like I have, but it says I haven't. And so I read Passion and Purpose, the story of Jim Elliot. I don't remember who the author's by. And then I've read Suffering is Never for Nothing by Elizabeth Elliot. And I just really enjoyed this book because you got to see a lot of how these men were interacting with these people even before they like touched the ground, basically. And so it was just really inspiring hearing their heart about these people and the way that the Lord had put it on their heart to go and minister to these people. And I just found this a really great book and I really loved it. The last book I read was Long Way Gone by Charles Martin, and we follow this 18-year-old named Cooper O'Connor, and his father is an evangelist that goes around and sharing the gospel. So he's done that like all of Cooper's life, and Cooper's mom died when he was about 3 or 4. So this is really all that Cooper has ever known. Cooper is a really great musician, and there are lots of secular people who come to his father's revivals just in hopes that Cooper will sign a contract to make music in Nashville. One night, Cooper gets really upset with his father, and he just decides to take the car, take his father's prized guitar, take all the money from his father, and he just drives straight on to Nashville. And so 5 years after being in Nashville, he meets this girl named Daly Cross, and she is a really good singer, and everybody thinks she is the new like the new hype, the talk of the town kind of thing. And so they end up falling in love. Cooper then faces a tragedy that threatens his life and his career, and with nowhere else to go, he then goes home. This book also goes 20 years in the future, and now Daly and Cooper run into each other again, and Cooper wonders if he will be brave enough to share with Daly all the secrets from the past that he has never shared with her. And I just loved this book so much. It was my favorite book of the month. There was so much about forgiveness and redemption. And then I also wanted to talk about the reading challenges I did this month. So I'm doing the buzzword reading challenge, and the prompt was you had to have before and after in the title, or after in the title. And so I read Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate, and then January for the buzzword cover challenge, you had to have an internal body part on the cover. So for that book, I used Atlas of the Heart. And then from Read Your Bookshelf challenge, it's Chantel Reads All Day. The title needed to include an article, so I read the book A Voice in the Wind. And then I also just wanted to talk a little bit about my Bible reading that I did, because that's even more important than the books I read. So in January, I read part of Matthew, and then I read all of Ephesians, Philippians, 2 Thessalonians, 2 John, and 3 John. And then I also read Genesis and parts of Exodus. And then I'm also studying through some books of the Bible on my own. So just like, instead of just reading, actually like listening to sermons and commentaries on them. So some of the ones that I've been studying through this month are, I've gone through part of Amos, and I did the first part of Amos in December. And then I did a few chapters in 2 Chronicles, and then some of Isaiah, and then some of 2 Kings, and then all of Micah. And I would really encourage you to, if you are Christian, to start by reading the Bible, because that is the first and most important thing that you can possibly read. And if you're not a Christian, I would encourage you to start reading the Bible. I would encourage you to start in the New Testament, in the book of John. And if you have any questions about the Bible or any of the books I read, I would love to answer them down in the comments. And thanks for watching my January wrap-up.